Right, time for us to turn our attention to the women's football final on Sunday between Meath and Kerry. It's a fascinating clash where this Meath team, we are already aware that the backroom team will be breaking up after this. Some of their best players will go on to have great AFL careers. This Kerry team have, in some respects, come from nowhere, but yet are also backboned by incredible experience, and one of their star players is off to America on a basketball scholarship after this too. So we may never see these two teams play at this level, or certainly there will be a different version of these teams next year if they meet again. I'm delighted to say we're joined by former Donegal player Nadine Doherty to preview the game. Nadine, how are you getting on?
I'm good, Mick. How are you?
It's Ger, actually. What's the...
Ger, how are you?
What is the feeling that you have about this one and how it's going to go?
It's a tricky one, because you look at this time last year and the landscape was similar in a way, whereby we had a very heavily tipped open team. Meath had impressed on their way to the final, and we were giving them kudos for that, but we really didn't see or give them a chance. And I suppose Kerry find themselves in a similar situation now. But I suppose looking at what you're saying there about Meath, and if the rumour mill is to be believed, it's a strange one. The week of the final, there could be a bit of deflection on behalf of Eamon Murray, coming out and making those comments and maybe taking a little bit of pressure off this Meath team. Because, as I said last year, there was no pressure. This year, there's huge pressure, and Kerry are underdogs, and I'm sure they're very happy about that.
Yeah, we were talking about this during the week with Noelle Healy, and she was just making the point that Meath's defensive style will actually invite Kerry into the game and give them a foothold. And so if you were trying to predict what's going to happen, you can see how Kerry might get an early lead in this, and that's kind of the pattern that we've seen from Meath since they have kind of ascended to the throne of being the best team in the country. So it's not ideal when you're like trying to squash your opponents who might be a little bit nervy in their first All-Ireland final, where you're like, yeah, come on in, you can have the ball, it's okay, we're grand with our defensive setup.
Yeah, and it'll be interesting to see how Kerry approach that. You'd hope, Ger, that they stick to their own guns and continue with that attacking football. It's hard to see how it will play out. I think Kerry will stick to their strength, because clearly their strength is in attack. They're happy enough to ship points at the other end. And their full belief is nearly like a Real Madrid style, if you were to compare it, in terms of a GA style. They're fully secure in that they will score at the other end. It will be interesting to see how they deal with the recycling situations, because invariably they are going to come up, this Meath setup, that's how they're set up. They're set up to frustrate teams. They're set up to push them back, to push them to the wings. But what Kerry are very good at using are the wings already. And, a lot of people haven't really noticed that. It's not all, let's just kick the ball down the middle, pop it off from the full forward line. They use the wings brilliantly. They use their wing backs. And I think Meath are going to find it as hard to, I suppose, defend them as they are to break down that Meath defensive system. I hope they keep Louise Navarre-Hurtig inside. I hope they're not tempted to bring her out around the middle and I suppose act as a playmaker. I hope they do stick to their guns in that way. And they have wonderful footballers who can kick the ball with accuracy. You have Niamh Carmody there on the half-forward line, Anna Galvin, Louise Scanlon there. There's a lot of talent there who don't panic on the ball. And I think that's why Meath have turned teams over. They forced them into panic on the ball. And this Kerry team just don't have a panic button. They really don't. And they've shown that in all their games to date. But as you said as well, in all their games to date, they haven't really had to come from behind. And it's Meath, I suppose, who are the masters at that situation of breaking teams down and keeping within touching distance, and then they just seem to have this other gear in the second half that they take off in. So I would imagine it will be a similar situation on Sunday, to be honest. It might be a little bit cagey by half time, and then we'll see what happens in the second half in terms of Meath's ability to close it out.
Why have Meath been so close to everybody this year? Have they not improved as a team? Did they not get a big bounce in terms of confidence and technical proficiency, or actually did everybody else just get better?
I think a mixture of both. There's a few factors with that Meath team, I suppose, that may have happened, may have caused this to happen this year. You know, you have players, Dunboyne players, Vicky Wall, Emma Duggan, those girls have been on the road continuously, not just for the last year, for the last 2 or 3 years, you know, with Dunboyne doing so well in the club championship, and also Meath, obviously, with their intermediate endeavours over the last few years. So a little bit of legginess, perhaps. There was no freshness brought into the management team that I know of. You know, perhaps there were people brought in, but it can get a little bit stale in that sense. Teams would have been inspired by Meath, obviously, over the last couple of years, seeing what they did. And I think most importantly, Ger, like the sport's come a long way in ladies football, and there is money there for analysis. And, you know, you have backroom teams now of up to 10 people. So I think teams have probably studied them and studied them and studied them. And they figured out ways of you know, breaking down that system. And also their key players, Vicky Wall and Emma Duggan, have come in for a huge amount of attention. And I think Vicky Wall especially has maybe struggled a little bit both on and off the pitch with that attention that has come with it. And teams have just got a little bit more clever as well. But there does seem to be a bit of a disjoint as well over the year. But listen, if you're back in an All-Ireland final, having only reached your best potential for 20-minute spells in a couple of games, it shows A, the pedigree of Meath, and B, does it show that perhaps other teams aren't as far ahead as we maybe think?
And maybe the levelling out of standards is only to be expected when you think about it. The last time Meath and Kerry played in Croke Park was the Division 2 league final, and we didn't think in 18 months' time they'd be in the Senior All-Ireland, but here we are, and both completely on merit as well. So I guess they should act as an inspiration for all the other counties out there who are Division 2 teams and be like, okay, maybe that could be us with proper organisation and getting our best players out on the field as often as possible.
Oh, 100%. It has been brilliant, and it has done a huge amount for the sport. There would have been a lot of teams who would have been thereabouts. And I suppose it's, I talk about it a lot. A huge amount of credit goes to these champions and these teams who come back year after year after year. I think a huge amount of credit has to also go to the teams who perhaps at the start of the year aren't given a hope by us anyway as pundits of going anywhere, and there has to be huge inner self-belief within those squads. And I suppose Meath showed that if you do get a good system in place, if you get excellent coaches in place, and if you have those, I suppose, 4 or 5 key players who are your game changers, your clutch players, and then you have a good nucleus and a good base of a squad, then you're definitely within a shout for an All-Ireland. And I suppose Kerry have proven that yet again this year. And looking at both teams, there was so little, as you say, between a lot of the teams in the quarterfinals, semi-finals, that thankfully women's football, you would hope, is at a place whereby it's similar to the men's competition, that it's pretty wide open every year, which is brilliant for the sport.
The one thing, and this came up during the week, about if you're the best young women's footballer, or if you're the best young men's footballer, there's far more incentive to stay and not go to Australia for the men than there is for the women. So there is definitely with each of the boom and arrival of new superstars, there's always this kind of mild lament in the back of your head, is like, well, how long are they going to be here for? And the way the Australian rules season worked up to this point was fine, but obviously their sport is booming. It's getting more and more viewership figures, more and more sponsorship. The salaries are going up. The season is getting longer. So this might be the last year that we have players who are able to play both.
Oh, definitely. 100%, I think. And that was even proven this year, bar the exception of Sinead Goldrick, really. All of those AFL players who had played in the last couple of years, they didn't touch a Gaelic football this year, which I suppose is disappointing. But as you said, that's the way it goes. And a boom bust is a very good way of putting it. And yeah, I've spoken about this with other people during the week, and you think, what can the LGFA do? And to be honest, there isn't a huge amount. Like, it's really attractive over there, and you can't blame players for going. At the same time, I would love to see players maybe giving their all up to, nearing the end of their career, maybe with football, and then having their swan song out with the AFL. But, that it's likely that won't happen. And also, I suppose, Ger, it might come to a point as well, a saturation point, whereby you have a lot of players, a lot of inter-county players who would like to go over to the AFLW, but they mightn't get the opportunity because that league in itself is going to get stronger and stronger year on year. And, by all accounts, they have brilliant development squads themselves going on over there. So you would think that it might come to a point whereby the opportunities aren't as many as they are at present, because we've seen it in sports in the past with the rugby, even with players, going over to America for the summers, that it just comes to a point where the homegrown talent is there, and these leagues don't look elsewhere. So it's the golden years, I'd say, at the minute, if you are a player looking to go over. But I would hope, as a GA fan, that filters out with time.
Nadine, it sounded a little bit like you were leaning towards Kerry when we were talking about how the matchup was actually going to play out.
I think they've a huge chance, Ger. Absolutely, they do. But it is very hard to look past this Meath team, and especially, as you said at the start of the show, it could be a swan song for a lot of them, and especially with that management team going, it's very hard to see them lose, simply because this year, they just, out of any team, they seem to have this ability to switch it on for 10 minutes, and when they smell blood, they can go for it. Kerry have a huge chance, they really do, and I'm not as concrete in my prediction this year as I was last year, when I really heavily favoured Dublin. I do favour Meath, I really do, but I think Kerry are going to be thereabouts, and it really wouldn't be a surprise if they were to pull off a win. But it's very hard to look past the champions, it really is.
I think one of her teammates put up side-by-side footage of Louise Niemeyer-Hartig catching a ball on the edge of the D, with the Gooch catching a ball on the edge of the D, and both of them stroking it to the back of the net. Just in terms of kicking style, it was languid and lovely. And Paris McCarthy is obviously, as I said, so athletic. She's heading off to the WNBA. She's not yet, but that's her long-term goal.
Not yet.
She's going to college, to a Division 1 college, hopefully en route to the WNBA. And so, that's that element of that team also breaking up, and they have some very experienced players who might be coming to the end of their career too, and a really strong Souls bench, it turns out, as well. That full forward line, though, just talk to us a little bit about that, because that seems to be where Kerry could do damage to this Meath team.
Oh yeah, they're a class act. Like you've mentioned Louise, every year she is top of the scoring charts, no matter what division Kerry are in. It's hard to think Louise is 30. Like, she's been around for such a long time, and every year, when Kerry were at their lowest, Louise was always in the top 5 in the country, I would feel, in terms of a full forward line. Young O'Leary has given a different dynamic this year, and I think that's going to be really, really interesting, because Meath haven't been pressed in that sense, in terms of players running at them, and that's what she does. We've seen other teams, I suppose, sit back, do the loop, do the pass back, do the recycle, where Danielle O'Leary just goes straight to goal. So it'll be interesting to see how Mary-Kate Lynch copes with her. And then in the other corner, you said Paris McCarthy, fantastic athlete, a real athlete. And what I love about the three of them as well, Ger, they're so clever in that, if the shot's not on, the shot's not on. And Louise has a brilliant capacity of looping around that D, and you'll see her on Sunday. She's like, speaking of basketball, she is essentially like your clutch player in basketball when the shot clock is down, and she's your go-to woman, and she'll just hang around that D and she'll pop them over left or right all day. And as we mentioned before, that half forward line, midfield line, they're wonderful at just finding them and finding space. And I know space will be limited with Meath, but I do think they will find space. And I suppose what's different to I suppose, my own Donegal there in the semi-final, Donegal created 20 scoring chances and only took 8. Whereas I think this Kerry team have the capacity to create more than 20 and score more than 8. So that is where their strength will lie. And
that seems to be why people are a little bit concerned about this Meath team, is that even though they have a defensive structure, they still coughed up 20 scoring chances in the semi-final.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And with that Donegal, they hit the post. Niamh McLaughlin 100% went for goal with that point she scored. But you have Monica McGurk as well, Jerry. So, just to counteract that, she's amazing. She's really amazing. She's a wonderful keeper. Her feet are excellent. She's a sweeper. She's the calm and presence there. And most importantly, she's one of the best shot stoppers that has ever played women's football. So while, you'll create those chances, and I do think Kerry are better finishers than any teams we've seen Meath in the past, Monica will have a huge, huge part to play in this game on Sunday. And I think if Meath do get over the line, she will be central to that.
Fingers crossed it's a cracker. One last thing, obviously the Women's Euros final is on, thrown in, kicking off an hour later after a throw in the women's football. It's unfortunate in that this could have been a great day for supporters of women's sport generally. Does that matter? Like, we haven't heard as big a push this week as we normally would have around a record breaking attendance, I suspect because they feel like they won't break the record, so therefore they're not talking about the possibility of it. And it just seems like there's less hype this year than there had been pre-COVID. What's your sense of all that at the moment?
Yeah, I agree, Ger, 100%. I think there's a few factors. The Euros, as you mentioned, even on my own WhatsApps this week, like loads of my friends who you'd meet up with once a year at this weekend, they're all over at the Euros. They got the tickets ages ago, not knowing that they'd clash. I also heard rumours today that the premium level isn't open at the weekend, which is really disappointing. I don't know if it's staffing or what the story is, but, a huge factor as well is Dublin out in the final. Dublin, they travel well because they don't have far to travel, obviously, and they always bring such a massive crowd. And then I suppose with Kerry last week, you'd really hope and you'd encourage those Kerry supporters, those true Gaels, to come up and support the women this weekend as well. So I suppose it's a myriad of factors, and I don't think it's going to be a huge attendance. I hope I'm wrong, but I don't think we are going to see what we have done in the past for all of those factors that we've just mentioned.
Can something fix that? Because you can't bank on the Dubs being in it every year, and we would really, we don't want them in it every year.
No, exactly, Ger, and that's a really good point. And I spoke about this before. I think the LGFA, in terms of their marketing, they're excellent at targeting their current market. Their female fans and their younger supporters. But I do think they might have to look at a strategy whereby they are reaching out in a better way and further to, I suppose, people who haven't engaged with the sport yet. You look back at Barcelona, Real Madrid this year, or was it last year in the women's soccer, and they got like a world record crowd of nearly 100,000. And what they did was a really clever ticketing strategy. There were family tickets, they were cheaper tickets, and they really overly marketed that match for weeks and weeks and weeks beforehand. So I think that is something that the association do and should look at, because as you said, the Dubs aren't going to be in it, and we don't want them in it every year, even though they'd want to be there, but something has to change for sure.
Yeah, they can come occasionally. We'll be happy with that.
Yeah, exactly.
have you strong feelings about Laois Wexford in the intermediate? Any thoughts on who's going to win that?
Yeah, funny, at the start of the week I was all for Wexford, and the more I listen and read things this week, Laois seemed to be tipped by a lot of people. It's going to be a cracker for sure. It's going to be high scoring. A lot of brilliant players. Big heritage there in Laois as well. Laois football. They've won Senior All-Irelands, and they've kind of languished there around the middle for a while. But it's been a really competitive championship, and I suppose Wexford were there last year, which has me tipping them this year. I think in terms of football and promoting the game, it would probably be a better thing for Laois to do it because they are up and coming. They've worked really hard with their underage, and I think with Wexford they have a lot of girls who've been playing for a couple of years now, and I think if they won this intermediate you might see a lot of players stepping away. I'm going to stick with Wexford. I think they will sneak over the line, but a cracker of a game definitely. I'd encourage people to get in for that, to be honest, because I do think it'll be entertaining.
The Antrim Fermanagh game throws in at 11:45. It's a full day of football. I'm always surprised that Antrim, given the numbers that they have or should have access to, are in the third tier here. Is this where they kind of springboard through, or can Fermanagh catch them?
Yeah, Antrim have been kind of yo-yoing over the last few years, really, Ger. They're up and down, or they're in a final. Fermanagh have come from nowhere in terms of expectation. They've lost, I think, 9 players from their squad from last year. But they have an excellent management team in with a lot of experience. Caoimhe Marley Morgan, who used to play with Armagh, is in there with them, and even her expertise in itself and what they've done to date would have me leaning a little bit more towards them. It'll be intriguing though, because these two teams, they've played each other in Ulster, and because you have so few teams in that junior league or that junior ranking, they're playing each other constantly, and they're all in Division 3 or 4. But should be a good game. But I'd hope for Caoimhe, should be a good friend. I hope for Fermanagh get over the line. But listen, it's an all Ulster affair, which I'm delighted with. So either way, I'll be happy.
Nadine Doherty, thanks very much for joining us and helping to preview the game on Sunday. Cheers.
Cheers, Ger.